Good morning. We are actually back to Ayin Beis. Well, we've been not left Ayin Beis, but we're actually learning back to Ayin Beis. And last class, we learned page 1473. And I want to continue that. That corresponds with the Mittler Rebbe's Maimer that we've been learning, page 381. Yeah. And what we learned was the way the Rebbe Rashab elaborates on the Mittler Rebbe's words, and that is that these two Yechudei La, Yechudei Tata, in order to bring from the Ayin Eliki, God, the Etzem of the divine, has chosen to express himself. That's called the Ayin of the Yesh Amiti. That's Oyer. But that Oyer is still divine, pure divine expression. It's not yet commensurate and measured according to creation's needs. So then there's another Ayin that emerges. That's the Ayin of the Yesh HaNivra, the Ayin that, what he calls Kiruv El HaYesh. It's associating with, it's engaging with, it's relating to the Yesh. Like we said, Yehi Oyer, Yehi Rakia. God is saying those words. And that is what he called in general Mamala Kalam. So the question is, how does it move from one ayin to the next? How does it go from a place of pure, seamless divine energy, in a way, bligvul, to an oyer that is going to manifest in a more defined way? And the answer is through the Mosach and Pasa, the Tzimtzum, basically. So the Mosach and Pasa between Atzilus and Bria explains that. That's an additional, that's a partition that creates a diffusion of the original light that's in the state of Yechudei La, like he called the Bittul B'Mitzias, because in Atzilus, all that you sense is godliness, even though he explained at length that Atzilus itself is also already relates to existence, but it's still all within Atzmus. It's the way the divine relates to existence, meaning it still retains its divine nature. So it's all relative to that. And he explained it with Atzilus the Klolos, a macrocosm, Lifnei Tzimtzum. There, it's all about the divine energy. However, in the divine energy itself, there's two levels. There's one, that's the energy that is to the divine as it relates to itself, and there's the energy of the divine as it relates to another. But it's still all within the Atzmus. So in that sense, in Atzilus, senses only the godliness of it. Then comes Binah, that follows Atzilus, and that's the state of a Yesh. Now the Eir is coming into a Yesh, the Malchus of Atzilus is piercing the curtain, this partition, and now the Eir is relating to the Yesh in actuality, not just as it is in its root. And there you have the Parsa, the Mosach and Parsa, the curtain that allows that leap from the state of Ayin, that he called Atzilus, to the state of the Ayin of the Yesh HaNivra, of a Yesh Amiti, to the state of the Ayin of the Yesh HaNivra as it is in Binah. And he said the difference in the bittul is, the bittul of Yechudei La is b'meila. It's automatic. You're immersed in that state, you're completely absorbed. The student is completely absorbed, the light of the sun within the sun. The second level is bittul hayesh. It's not memela. He calls it b'daite v'ritzene. It's at his own volition. The entity chooses to be bottled, to be subjugated. That's very different than it being automatic, as it is in Atzilus. So Atzilus and Bria, or Atzilus and Binah, serve as these two steps of Yechudei La and Yechudei Tata, Bittul Mitzias and Bittul Hayesh, or Das Elyon and Das Tachten, in this context. And that's more or less sums up what we learned in Ayin Beis, which is really based on what the Mittler Rebbe said. But now, the fact is we know that the two levels of Ayin is not just Atzilus and Bria, it's also in higher levels. As the Mittler Rebbe spoke about at the end of the paragraph on page 381. So I wanted to continue learning in Ayin Beis, the parallel to that, at the bottom of page 1473 in Ayin Beis. Where he now is going to talk about that these two levels of Ayin also exist on higher levels, not just Atzilus and Bria, but also Chachma and Binah and Keser, and even higher, as we'll learn now inside. I do want to qualify one thing that I said, pretty clear as well, that even though Atzilus, he calls it Ispashtus Ha'er, that it's relative to Etzem Ha'er. So really, if you want, you could say that Etzem Ha'er is more Ayin of the Yesh Amiti, and Ispashtus Ha'er, Atzilus the close, is more Ayin of Yesh Nivra. But in relation to Bria, Atzilus is still like Ayin of Yesh Amiti, because Atzilus is all godly. It's just the godliness that relates to existence. And then the Ayin of the Yesh Nivra is the Ayin that actually enters into existence to create, the actual process of creation. So I just wanted to qualify and make that clear. Okay. So going back to Ayin Beis, at the bottom of page 1473, so we learn the Kozam Pnei Oral Kes and B'chinas Ayin She'ir Bo Al Dei Aparsa is in a state of Tzimtzum. And that's why the Nevroim are only Ora Dora, Yesh, and then comes Bitla Yesh. Okay, so 6 lines from the bottom of the page, he's now going to move and say, these 2 levels we're talking about, Atzilus and Biyah, also exist in higher levels. Kamoi Kain, he says, and the pages can be found at ayinbeis.com if you want to look inside, if you don't have the book. So this parallels again, I'm looking at the Mittler Rebbe's Maimer here. Yeah. Ukamoi Kain. So also starts with Ukamoi Kain. Ukamoi Kain min hamaitzel el anatzolim. Yesh gam ken beis b'chinas hanal. Just as we spoke that there's Atzilus and Biyah, and Bria from the Maitzel, from the emanator to the emanation to Atzilus, till in the Tzolim of Atzilus, there are also 2 levels. Shari v'achachma ma'ayin temotz. Because we say Chochma comes from Ayin, shenimtzas b'b'chinas yesh ma'ayin de Keser. Chochma comes from the Ayin of Keser, like yesh ma'ayin of Keser. That means Chochma ma'ayin. Timotza, that means it's found, it emerges yesh ma'ayin from Keser. So now we see that Chochma of Atzilus, which is the beginning of all of Atzilus, is a state of yesh compared to Keser, its source, yesh ma'ayin. Ub'chinas ha'ayin de Keser, k'moishu ub'chinas ha'keser. The ayin of Keser, the way it's on the level of Keser, hu b'chinas ayin shel yesh amiti. That's the ayin of the yesh amiti. So now we've moved higher. Until now we've been talking that Atzilus is Yichudei Elah, and Bria, Biyah is Yichudei Tata. Now he's saying, relative to Atzilus, even higher in Keser. Hu b'chinas ha'bitl di Yichudei Elah, the Kolo Mamish. So Keser is this level of Yichudei Elah, utter bittul, utter nullification, Kolo Mamish, literally like as if it doesn't exist. Ukamaimer, and here he brings this maimer that the Mittler Rebbe also brought. Keser Elyon, Chaf Ayin is Keser Elyon. Afagav the Ihu Oyer. Even though it's a Oyer, he says Tzach and Tzach. He doesn't bring all the language, the whole language. But even though it's a very refined and high level of Oyer, Ukamhu, or Ukamhu. Kodam Ilas Elis. It is dark, meaning nullified, Kodam, in the presence of, or when it stands before the cause of causes, which is referring it to its source, to the Yesh Amiti. And he says, what is Ukam B'chinas Shachrus? That's darkness. Ubitl B'tachlis, and utter nullified. So when you say something is dark, you could say it's dark because it doesn't have any light, or you could say it's dark compared to a much higher state it's dark. It's like the light, the candle in the light of the sun is actually a state of darkness. When you look at a candle in the light of the sun, you'll actually see dark, like a shadow, as opposed to light. That same candle in a dark room gives off light. In the light of the sun, it's actually a state of limited light. Like the student in front of his teacher is silent. Just for the word shachrus, like we say shachris in the morning, we say shachris, alois hashachar. So the Zohar actually asks the question, why does it say alois hashachar? The rise of what? It should say, if it's shachar means the dawn, it's the descending of the dawn, not the alois hashachar. So he explains shachar is referring to the darkness. That dawn breaks when the darkness rises, when the darkness is removed. So shachrus comes from the word darkness, not from the word light. And that is the state of uchamu kadam ilis bittul betachlis. So what do we see from this now? That Keser is the level of Ayin of Yesh Amiti Yechudi Allah, and Chachma, as it comes from Keser, is already a state of a Yesh, something, what he's going to say, the Ayin of the Yesh HaNivra, it's already, so it's on a higher level. Before we were talking Atzilus in general is Yechudi Allah, because Atzilus is completely consumed with Elikus. Now he's moving this to a higher level. Then comes a second level. That's the Ayin of Yesh Amiti Keser. As Keser becomes a source for Chachma, so there's a second level of Ayin in Keser that becomes the Ayin of the Yesh HaNetzel. Now it's Keser, not as Keser standing and looking and gazing at its source. There it's completely nullified compared to its source. But then the Keser becomes a source for Chachma, then it becomes the Ayin of the Yesh HaNetzel, not Yesh HaNivra. The Ayin now is becoming the Ayin, the energy that's manifesting in the Yesh HaNetzel, meaning Chachma and the spheres below it. So you see here, the language of the Rebbe Rashab is a little different than the Mittler Rebbe. The Mittler Rebbe said more or less the same thing, but he said it in a way that was not so clear. Just to compare, when we learned in the Mittler Rebbe, he said, "B'chachma bina datzil sheyeshem gamke beis hofchim the das elyon das tachten, ma'ayin liyesh or ma'ayin yesh la'ayin and ma'ayin liyesh." He says, "Chachma ma'ayin the keser t'motzah b'chinis yesh lismashach bebina." There he brought Binah to emphasize that the Chachma goes into Binah. Even though it's clearly Mokar Mashpia that Chachma is also in a state of Yesh. He said that clearly. But the Rebbe Rashab says it in far more, we'll say, far more defined terms. Whereas the Mittler Rebbe, it's a little more amorphous, or you could say, can interpret it different ways. But the bottom line, the pshat is the same. Okay. Now, since here you have two levels of ayin that are a paradigm shift, what accounts for this shift? Before we said it's the parsa, the partition between Atzilus and Bria, and Biyah. So it says, "Who gamken al yedei parsa." This too, this distinction between the ayin of Yesh Amiti of Keser to coming to the ayin of the Yesh HaNetzal of Keser, is also through a parsa. Sheyesh, next page, ben ha-keser lechachma. There's a partition between keser and chachma. Here he doesn't call it avira the krema as he used the Mittler Rebbe. Here, the Rebbe Rashab instead, on top of page 1474, I turned the page. Here he just refers us to what he said earlier in volume 2. U'kamoishin is bar li'il be'inyan sheyesh parsoyis ad reish kol dargin. As was explained earlier in Ayin Beis, namely pages 876 and on, and 956 and on, we explained that there's parsoyis to the high, all the way up to the highest levels. The Mittler Rebbe said this parsa is the parsa of the membrane above the brain, between the brain and the skull, between Chachma and Keser. Here he doesn't say what the parsa is. He refers us there because there he does discuss that level, that membrane. But what do you see from here? That now we have the same idea that we spoke about, Atzilus and Biyah. We're now talking about Keser and Chachma. but he's not finished, like the Mittler Rebbe was not finished. Then there's another parsa, another 2 levels of ayin. V'chein, on top of page 1474, Binah la Midos, between Binah, which comes from Chachma, and the Midos. Remember, Binah, Ema Bonim Smecha, Binah is the contemplation that births emotions. Yesh Gamkin Parsa. So there too you have 2 levels, Binah and that. There's also a Parsa. And here too, in by the Mittler Rebbe, he spoke about Chachma Binah Midos, Parsa. He calls that the Meitzer HaGarden. The Meitzer HaGarden is the throat. Here again, the Rebbe Rashab does not tell us what the parsa is. He just says, Yesh Gamkin Parsa, Shaydezeh mi Bora Eila. Through that, the mi of Binah, Bora Eila, Eila is the Lamed Vav, is Gematria 36, the 6 times 6 emotions. Sheyesh B'zeh Gamkin Beis B'chinas Ayin Hanal. Here too you have 2 levels of ayin, and therefore you need a parsa. The ayin of Binah, that is removed from the Midos, and the ayin of Binah that it relates to the Midos. That's most likely what he means by the 2 levels of ayin. Ma'ayin da soga the Binah, the yesh, the Midos. Yeah, because the Midos are a yesh. Shinimuhus. So that's the parsa here. Now, in contrast to the Mittler Rebbe, the Rebbe Rashab is now going to take us higher and higher. The Mittler Rebbe stops here. The last thing the Mittler Rebbe says, there's also between the Midos and Dibur. But he doesn't go deeper and higher. He stops. The highest he's gone through here is Keser, the 2 levels of Ayin and Keser. But the Rebbe Rashab, remember, goes further, because in Chassidus, the Rebbe Rashab takes us all the way before the Tzimtzum. So here he says, on a higher level, Ubechlolus, Yesh says. And in more general terms, Bechinas HaKav, Hanimshach Meir Ein Sof, the Kav that transmits from Eir Ein Sof, from before the Tzimtzum, Hu Bechinas Gilui Ha'er Liyasmoka Lishtalshlus, that's like the ayin of the Yesh HaNivra. It's a revelation of light to be the source of the cosmic order. V'nikla Shchinta, Kamoshn is barely ill. That's called the level of Shekhinah, like we learned earlier, page 1439. And that ayin, Hushabai they have Tzimtzum. That kav came through the pause or interruption of the Tzimtzum, the concealment of B'chinas Dilug V'richuk Bin Atzmus, which was like a quantum leap from Atzmus, which means from before the Tzimtzum. He's telling us to look in the Maimer of Sfartam in the year Tafresh Ayin Zayin. Remember, this is Ayin Beis. This is the Rebbe Rashab was writing in continuing to write Ayin Beis. So this is sending us back to the Maimer. Ayin Zayin would be the year 1917. So therefore, the Kav Harizeh B'chinas Ayin Shalei Yesh De'elamis. So now even higher than Keser, the Ayin of the Yesh of the worlds is Kav. And what's the ayin of the Yesh Amiti? According to that, but Ha'erein Sof Shalifnei HaTzimtzum, and the infinite divine light that's pre-Tzimtzum, Hakol Ba'atzmus, which is in general, like we learned, encompassed within the core because it's not yet emerged to create yet. Hu B'chinas Ayin Shel Yesh Amiti. That's the level of the Ayin Shel Yesh Amiti. So here the Rebbe Rashab is gone a step even higher than the Mittler Rebbe to tell us that these 2 levels of ayin we're talking about goes all the way up to the Kav and to Eir Ein Sof before the Tzimtzum. Indeed, earlier we learned in the end of volume 2 that in Lifnei Tzimtzum also he said that the Spashtus Eir he called the ayin of the Yesh Amiti, and Etzema Eir La'atzmei he called the ayin of the Yesh Amiti, and the Spashtus Eir of the ayin of the Yesh Hanivra, I should have said. So he doesn't mention that here, but he did mention it earlier. So I'm just pointing that out. Okay. So that sums up the Rebbe Rashab's way of explaining the 2 levels of ayin and the parsa in between the 2. In this case, you see, he's no longer using the word parsa, he uses the word tzimtzum. Because as I said, once you get to the kav and Ein Sof, you don't use parsa, you use the word tzimtzum. Whether there is a parsa there or not, I think there is not, if I recall correctly, but definitely tzimtzum for sure there is. Because parsa is already a separate, like a curtain is a separate entity. The tzimtzum is more of a concealment within yourself. You're concealing it. I'm concealing my energy. Parsa is you're utilizing another entity, like an example or a curtain, to diffuse and limit the light. Whereas tzimtzum is your own effort of diminishing it, of restraining restraining yourself or refraining from expression. Refrain, that's a good word, yeah. Any questions so far to what we've just learned? Because now I'm going to conclude here that these are the two levels. Okay, so now he says, this goes completely consistent with the Mittler Rebbe's Maimer. He says, "V'zeh inyan beis hayechudim d'shma u'baruch Shem kved malchus leilam v'od." Like he began on top of page 1472. So there's two yechudim, Shema and Baruch Shem, or in Shema itself, Hashem Elokeinu and Hashem Echad. The Hashem Echad who bechinas habitl yechudi lo. So in Shema, Hashem Echad is the higher bitl of yechudi lo, a higher unity. Behind the bechinas Ayin shal yesh amiti. That's the Ayin that's completely nullified in the presence of the yesh amiti of the source. The kol mashenisava kol b'chinas ayin mamish b'lishum mitzias klal. Everything created from that perspective is completely ayin, utterly nothing, without any existence, because it's only from the point, because it's only godliness choosing to want to create. U'baruch Shem kreid malchus leilam v'od, hu b'chinas malchus. That's kreid malchus, b'chinas ayin shalei yesh de'elamus. That's already about talking about the ayin of the yesh of elmish. Yes, b'chinas mitzias. There is an existence. Actually, b'chinas bitla yesh, but that existence is aligned and subjugated to godliness, like we learned earlier. So you see, these are the two levels. Where those levels are, he spelled out. It's either Atzilus and Bria, or it's Keser, the two levels in Keser of the ayin and Keser that goes to Chachma. Or it's from Binah to Midos, or the highest from Ein Beis before the Tzimtzum to the Kav. That's the way the Rebbe Rashab explained it. So now we finished two key points. I should say three. One is the concept of Yesh Ma'ayin, that there's nothing in common between creator and creation, even as the divine, and there's no effect on the creator. So even as the divine comes down into the lower levels, into existence, it remains unaffected by it. It preserves its integrity. Second point, we learned that there's two levels of ayin. The das elyon and das tachton, and the difference between them. And the third thing we learned is a parsa, a partition that creates the ability for the shift to happen, the paradigm shift. The next piece we're going to learn, and I'm going to go back to the Mittler Rebbe and then come back to Ayin Beis, is that all this sounds like, okay, so there's two levels. But we say Keil Deus Havaya, that God encompasses both. So now he's going to come and discuss that even though I just explained two different levels of bittul, in truth, from the point of view of Atzmus, they both become all one. So that's the next step in this discussion. Yeah. Any questions? Questions? Okay. What I just said is the key piece, because all this is going to come back to explain how through Shema and Baruch Shem we come to V'ahavtas Hashem Elokecha b'chol levavcha b'shnei yitzarecha, that also the Nefesh Habamis can come to love God. So again, remember, there's the concept of a creator and a creation, infinitely distant. There's the next concept that there's two levels in the divine energy, the divine that remains removed and the divine that manifests in existence, even though that's also Leishanisi, as we learned. And there's the parsha that accounts for and explains how it shifts, how that divine energy shifts from our perspective. And now we're going to go back to say, how did God see it all? And basically, he's going to say that God sees both Yechudim as one. It's not two levels of Yichud. By us, it's two levels of Yichud, not by Hashem. That's what is going to be the next piece, that we already learned in the Mittler Rebbe somewhat when he said that even the Eir, as it comes into existence, in Dibur HaMaisa still retains the Leishanisi element, like the Eir, higher Eir. But now he's going to spell it out in more specific that both levels of Yichud, Kel Deis Havaya, come together as one. Okay. You want to ask something? Say something.
No, basically, it means that.
And what's that? One more thing. And that's what's going to mean Hashem Echad. We don't say two levels of Yichud. We say Hashem Echad, because he's going to say both of them are in that Hashem Echad. Okay. And one pasuk. It's how the Rebbe Rashab ends Ayin Beis. Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Okay. It has to be a process. Even when it's coming down, in everything there is first the way that is by him, and then that he's shifting down. There has to be a mosach in between.
Yeah, but now we're going to learn that this mosach does not conceal for God. God is not affected by the mosach. We are, only we are. We're going to learn this. We're going to learn inside now. We already learned it in Ayin Beis, actually. On page 1476, but we're going to learn now in the Mittler Rebbe. Remember, all this is a step-by-step process that each of us has to go through to understand the relationship between God and existence. So first we learn about God relating to existence. Then we learn about God beyond existence. Then we learn that for God, relating and beyond are all one. So just keep in mind, it's a stage-by-stage process. And it could very well be that if you're still not there, you're not going to fully understand the yichud of both yichudim. You know, as I say many times, that's an academic concept, as long as you don't have it in avodah. In avodah, these are very different levels, yichud tata, yichud ilah. So many people can say, hey, you're going already to a level that is beyond yichud tata and yichud ilah. I barely have yichud tata figured out. But nevertheless, that's what the Rebbe Rashab is going to do. He's going to now teach us, Mittler Rebbe, I should say, and the Rebbe Rashab, about a level that's beyond Yechud Tata and Yechud Ilah. So just keep that in mind. Though, as I said, most of us still struggle with Yechud Tata, obviously. Okay? So now at the bottom of page, going back to Mittler Rebbe's Maimer, the bottom of page 381, we finished now reviewing Ayin Beis, page 1473, 1474, that corresponded with 381, the Mittler Rebbe. But now a new paragraph, Mittler Rebbe, begins V'omnom. And in Ayin Beis, you'll see, he also starts Omnom, the next paragraph. But I learned Ayin Beis after we learned the Mittler Rebbe. V'omnom, however, though we just explained that there are two levels of Yichud, one is Bitl Yesh, one is Bitl Mitzias in the language of Rebbe Rashab. But bottom line, two levels of Ayin and two levels of Yichud. Hine afal pisha b'derech klal. Even though in general, Beza Madrega Sanal, the two above mentioned levels, the B'chin is Das Elyon, the perspective from above, that the Yesh la'ayin, it goes from Yesh to Ayin. The Das Tachten, that it goes from Ayin to Yesh. Hein Beis Hovchim Mamish, even though in general they're two diametric opposites, literally diametric opposites, two different perspectives. Shazeo Sha'amar V'loi V'loi. Remember we said V'loi Niskenu Aliles? So B'kri, when you read it, it says V'loi, with a aleph. Which one's kri? Which one's ksiv? I forgot. But one way or the other, let's see, the Rebbe Rashab says it clearly. So even though, so loy loy, one is written and one is the way it's spoken, and that's two opposites. Because when you say veloy with a vav, it means to him. He is the plotter, if you wish, the one who governs all workings.
This is probably the kri with a vav.
Yeah, the Rebbe Rashab said beferish. I think with the vav is the key. Yeah. Let me just see here. One second.
Yeah, you could see it in the Siddur.
Yeah.
In the Siddur, it said with a vav, it doesn't say even the ksiv.
The kri is bevav, and the ksiv is with aleph, the other way around. The ksiv is with an aleph. That's what he says here on top. Okay. So when you say veloy with a vav, it means he relates to existence, to all these workings. Veloy with a aleph means he doesn't relate. So she says these are two opposites. Kamai, like he said before, remember the bottom of page, here we are, the bottom of page 379, he said, Iu tough is bekula alma. The Eibishter contains all the worlds, but the world does not contain him. Hu mekayim shalelam. But the world does not contain him. So you see from that he relates to it, but it doesn't relate to him. Shazewi and das tachten ma'ayin liyesh. That's where he relates to existence. Das tachten, that's from the ayin to the yesh, the lower ayin. On the other hand, less machshavet tfisa beklal. She'ena ela mekeme. That means that the world does not relate to him. That's the higher level. Das elyon, zeh b'chinas das elyon. So what do you see from that? That in general, das elyon and das tachten are very two different perspectives. One is a complete bittul mamish. Existence doesn't exist because God is beyond existence. It's the ayin of the yesh amiti. The ayin of the yesh anivra is das tachten, is that, yes, from that level of godliness, existence does exist. So even though these are two opposites, two diametric opposites, says the Rebbe Rashab, says the Mittler Rebbe, we call mokim, nevertheless, he misachdim yachad. They become one, because remember, Keil Deus Avaya, Hainu, which means, Shebechin is Das Tachten, Shema Ayin Liyesh, that Das Tachten, the lower perspective, that the Ayin is relating to the Yesh. Shava Mamish is equal, actually, exactly equal, perfectly equal, Kamoy Bechinas Das Elyon, like Das Elyon, which is the higher level of Bittul.
I think you skipped now.
Not that I know of.
שזהו דס מאין ליש.
Shava mamish kamei b'chinas das elyon. Okay, it's mamish equal, and we're going to learn how that works soon.
מה זה ראשי תיבס? ולמד מם דלת טוב בייס חוף.
I read it. Let's mashava the tvisa beklal.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Shava mamish kamei. Ubein b'yichud tata. And Bain, both in Yichud Tata, the lower Yichud, the Midos, the Dibur, the Yud Maamorei of the Midos that he spoke about, and the Dibur, the speech of the 10 statements that God makes. Remember, we said before that the Midos relate to existence. And furthermore, the Dibur relates to existence. That's Yichud Tata. It's Hashem saying, Yehi Oyer, Yehi Rakia, and so on. Shenikra, Seviv umamala befrat. That when you break it down, it's referred to Seviv umamala. I just want to make sure. Yeah. The question is which is Seviv and which is Mamala. Midos is Seviv and Mala is Dibur? Not sure. Or he's talking to maybe Midos and Dibur is Seviv Mamala, relatively speaking, maybe. Now that's Bein B'Yechud Tata. Bein B'Yechud Ilah. The Chachma Binah, because relative to the Midos, Chachma Binah is Yechud Ilah. Ayin the Keser canal, which comes from the Ayin of Keser. In other words, he's bringing together all the levels he spoke before. Okay. 1 minute here. Just put them on. Okay. And then he goes now further. In Keser itself, L'chein ba'ayin de Keser Atzmei. And same thing in the Ayin of Keser itself. Shenikra b'chinas memutza. That's called the interface. Bein Atzmus ha'maitzel and Atzolim. And here you can see where the Rebbe Rashab took from this and built out what we read before. The Mittler Rebbe brings it now in a parenthesis, almost like afterwards. So in Keser itself, which is the interface between the core emanator and the emanations, so there too you have two levels. When Keser is considered like only being from the last level of Atzmus, we say Atik is like Achron Sheba Atzmus. That's Das Elyon Miyesh to Ayin Ha'Aleph, the Kala Chashiv. That's completely nullified. Nikri Yura Beishis, like we learned before, Yura Beishis, that it's completely like Beishis is shamed, darkened. Even though Ertzach, it's a refined light, but Keser Elyon is Ukum, it's dark compared to the cause of causes. The Atzmus Ein Sof Baruch Hu. So now in Keser itself, you have that level. And then there's a second level in Keser. That Masha B'chinas Keser is called the head of the emanations. B'chlal, Zeo Ma'ayin Liyesh, the B'chinas Das Tach. That's already how Keser is becoming, in Keser itself, Ma'ayin Liyesh of Das Tachten. The Rebbe Rashab actually spelled out these two levels of Ayin and Keser. The Mittler Rebbe didn't spell it out before, but the Rebbe Rashab spelled it out clearly, these two levels of Ayin of Keser. Yeah. But this is another example how the Mittler Rebbe, I don't like to say run on, but there's this free flow where it's just flowing from him and not always seems organized, because seemingly this should have been said at the end of the last paragraph where he spoke about the two levels of Ayin, but he's saying it now. Or not the end of the paragraph, but earlier on where we spoke about the two levels of Ayin. But he's saying it now. So what do we have? So that now he's saying, so even though there's two levels, so he said, in truth, they're one. They're united as one, even though they're opposites. And the same thing now with Yechud Tata and Yechud Ilah. That Bein Yechud Tata, Bein Yechud Ilah, he's going to say that both of them come together as one by the Eibishter. But he hasn't yet come back to it. So he's going to talk more about these two levels. And then he's going to come back and say, and by the Eibishter, they're like one, not like two. But let me stop if anybody wants to ask anything. Okay. And now he continues. To continue, and this is another example, as I said, the Mittler Rebbe is now bringing more details about the two levels of Ayin, when in fact he already spoke about the two levels of Ayin, and he's now moved to the next stage, which is that they're really all one when you talk from the point of view of the Eibishter. But he's going back now and explaining these two levels of Ayin further. But I said the Rebbe Rashab would not do that. The Rebbe Rashab keeps these things usually separate. Mitler Rebbe you can have is because of that flow that I've spoken about, of the Chavas Hanor of Binah. It's like the expansiveness of the rivers of Binah, so the ideas flow back and forth. So now he's going to continue to explain the two levels of Ayin. He says, and how they really are one. Uksiv. Actually, I should say he's now going to explain how they're one. Uksiv, ani Rishon v'ani Achron. So we have a pasuk that says, I am the first and I am the last. Ani is the Eisius Ayin. Beis pomim, ani. So we say ani Rishon, ani Achron. Ani is the letters Ayin. It's referring to the twice ani, referring to the two levels of Ayin Hanal, the above mentioned two levels of Ayin. Ayin of the Yesh Amiti, Das Elyon. Ayin of the Yesh Nivra, Das Tachten. The Nivdolim Zemezeh, B'dichuk Mokim Dafke, that are separate, various different locations. Obviously, it doesn't mean physical locations. He means conceptually. They're very diametric opposites before he called them. They're very distant from one another. That's why you needed the parsa. Because to go from one to the next, you need a leap. You need a diffusion that comes with the partition. V'ayin aleph, the b'chinas das elyon, ani Rishon. The first ayin is the das elyon ani Rishon, the higher level. But then we say that even though they're two separate, but we say ani Rishon or ani Achron, you say them in one breath. That by the Eibishter he's both. Zeru ani Achron, the same one who's ani Rishon is the one that's ani Achron, the das tachten bli hefresh klal. So here he says, going back again to the point that he made. So they are, b'derech klal, two opposites, from our perspective for sure. But by the Eibishter, they're like one. They become like one. Ani Rishon v'ani Achron. That's the pasuk. Taka two levels, but I am as I am first, I am last. So he's saying it's the same level. Bli hefresh klal, but there's no difference between them. Ve'ein b'chinas haparsa teifas mokim klal. And this parsa that earlier we spoke about that distinguishes and creates that leap from the point of view of the recipient is not teifas klal. Teifas mokim klal. It doesn't have any effect at all. The Kamosh ani Rishon bizgalus era Atzmus miyesh la'ayin. The Eibush is saying, just like I am the first, in the revelation of that expression of the era Atzmus from yesh to ayin that Atzmus chose to express himself through without any definition. Kach, so too am I ani Achron ma'ayin liyesh b'klal ubefrat. So too am I the last one. So too am I. When my ayin, the Eibishter's ayin, goes and manifests into each part of existence, so from our perspective, it's a lower level of the parsa. I'm exactly the same thing. It's exactly the same when it goes ma'ayin liyesh, b'chlal ubefrat, both generally and specifically. Like we learned earlier, that the Lo Shanisi does not get the integrity of the immutability of the divine does not change because it comes down to lower levels. In the nefesh, it does, but when it comes to lakus, even in the lowest koich hapel benifel, yesh ma'ayin, meaning the ayin that relates to the lower yesh of das tachten, is exactly like the ayin that relates to the higher yesh of Atzmus from the point of view of the Eibishter. That means ani Rishon v'ani Achron. That he's equating the two. Not separating them, but equating them, saying they're the same thing. Mamish kach ani Achron. Any questions? Let me stop here for any questions. Now, of course, this needs explanation, and we will have that explanation as we go along. And especially in Ayin Beis, he explains it even further. So we'll do that as well. But I want to first learn it inside, which will probably go till around, I think, the top of the paragraph on page 383. And then we shall go back to Ayin Beis, and then we will see how Ayin Beis continues to parallel the Mittler Rebbe's Maimer, But then we're going to see where Ayin Beis ends and the Mittler Rebbe continues. That's what I want to really get to it ultimately. So meanwhile, they're both going along, and you have the Ayin Beis following the Mittler Rebbe's structure, point by point, and to sum again the points with the exponents comes. First point is Shema Yisrael, is Shema Havana, in the concept of Yesh Ma'ayin, which includes two things: that there's nothing in common between the Yesh and the Ayin, meaning between existence and the Creator, creation and the Creator. There's nothing in common, and there's no Shinui Nispilus, no effect on the Creator. Point number two, that there's two levels of Ayin, the Ayin of the Yesh Amiti and the Ayin of the Yesh Hanivra, Das Alin and Das Tachten. Point number three, that you need a parsa between them because there's this quantum leap. And point number four, that we're going to now, that from point of view of Lakus, however, they're all one. And this is all meant for us to come to appreciate. So obviously you can't jump to the fourth point I just made if you don't first go through the first earlier points. But they're laying out here all the steps that will ultimately teach us that even the yichud and the lowest levels down below are one with the highest levels, which will ultimately be able to impact also the animal soul, meaning that even the yesh hanivra will ultimately be able to experience or appreciate at least the higher levels of yichud. But we'll get there when we get there. Meanwhile, these are the four main points that the Mittler Rebbe laid out, and the Rebbe Rashab is paralleling, obviously. And we're now on point number four, which is that they are one. But that is going to be elaborated upon more as we continue learning. But I'm going to stop here. There's a lot to digest. I don't want to overwhelm this, not for myself and not for you. So, and I see Veloy and Veloy, Niskanu Alilis keeps coming back, because that captures both sides. Veloy, that he does relate to existence, and Veloy, that he does not. And both are ultimately connected to each other. Okay. I'm going to stop here. The line Bechlal Befrat. That's clear around a third of the way. It says how many lines? 3, 6, 8 lines from the top of page 382. We'll stop here. Are there any questions? Okay. I remember that Ani Rishon, Ani Achron with Ayin was also mentioned in Ayin Beis. We're probably going to learn it inside when we get there. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, he says it actually explicitly on page 1474. We'll get there. Okay. Which is good. It's all building nicely. And it's all going to come together. We're literally going to see where the Rebbe Rashab stops and the Mittler Rebbe continues. Okay, that's going to be interesting. Okay, so we stop here, top of page 382.